Okay, so this is a story coming from the fearful components of some of the world leaders. There is a nexus whereby the different world leaders can meet, and the different artificial intelligence systems associated with the world militaries uh, evidently can bump into each other. As far as we know, the American equivalent is called Echelon, and the most latest iteration publicly is called DeepSeek with China, but there's also the Russian and NATO ones. Um, the sad reality is that the cybernetics programs that was with the little implants that they were putting in the soldiers were all networked not only with each other, but there wasn't necessarily full national security protocols taken for international issues. So it meant that due to the means by which the cybernetic implants were communicating with back-to-base operations in the local militaries, or in case of Allies joint operations, it was possible for hackers from international forces to hack telecommunications facilities to indirectly hack those particular cybernetic implants. Okay, so that's the backstory of it, and all the greater subgrid associated with all that is the international military's communication systems. What happens there is that here someone becomes a president of a country, not a prime minister of Australia, but like a president of a country, like United States, China, Russia are good examples. Then they also become connected up. So an AI avatar is made of them to work within that system. So the leader or the commander, if their role is commander in chief of the military, then they would have a duplicate of some kind put into that system, so that the hierarchy of their military communicates as though it's sort of like as an analog or as those type of situation. That's true as true of the Chinese as it is of the Russians and as it is of the Americans. And the consequence is that if you were to connect up to that system, however unintentionally and unfortunately, you might have experienced illusions of ironically world leaders talking to each other about military operations. So without further ado, let's talk about what's really happening here, and the greater highest timeline of all of that, because at the moment it's looking pretty scary. Okay, so what we're experiencing predominantly is called a shuffling of the deck. So Vladimir Putin's role was to be the dictator of Russia for some time. He inherited the legacy of the USSR and previous presidents of Russia. He was, in fact, a KGB agent some time ago. He was not part of the KGB agent that allegedly recruited Mr. Trump as an asset in the 1980s. The consequence of Trump being an asset is that over the course of the long term, the objective was to reduce Cold War tensions and increase friendship capabilities between Russia and the United States. This, in turn, as a consequence of Russia and China already being in some kind of relationship with each other, increases the probability of China, Russia, and the United States operating in a spirit of non-aggression, so they don't interfere with each other's stuff. The problem with that, the problem with that is that the United States Australia alliance. So the United States Australia alliance is supposed to be protective against, well, you guessed it, China, and other countries that might have similar interests. So where say the Chinese or the Russians to hack a mobile phone tower in order to get to a cybernetic implant that was affecting an ADF soldier. That would probably be for the long-term objective of increasing the probability of Russia-United States close relationships. The problem there is that is the strongman issue. The strongman issue is that Trump and Putin and Xi all have reputations of being strongman dictators, and so you probably have noticed that as well, that Russia is allegedly having relationships with North Korea. Okay, on the subject of North Korea and China. North Korea and China is the ones that you really need to look into. So Russia has already succeeded in increasing the proximity of US-Russia relations, which basically gets China off the United States back. It has, however, not done anything to stop the North Korean issue. The North Korean issue is a subset of the Chinese issue. The Chinese have, in fact, been posing as North Korean operatives in some cases, relying on basically on racism. It's also the case that Taiwanese and other forces have posed as Chinese also, again, for the purposes of that. And it is also the case that the United States has been known to pose as Chinese, and so has Russians. So we've got a situation here where the different world militaries pose as each other, using the systems that they claim to be clandestine and secretive, yet are not, and basically showing enormous amounts of international collusion. So the real issue then becomes is what's NATO's role in all of this? NATO is what America is allegedly pulling out of in favour of becoming closer to Russia. The thing is though NATO is sort of an alliance whereby if America got attacked by a country, NATO would step in. If any of the NATO countries got attacked, America would step in. So it's sort of like pulling out of NATO is probably not a good idea. What's probably a good idea is to have Russia in NATO. Instead of the United States pulling out of NATO, Russia should be brought into NATO. And then that would make it for an interesting thing. Technically, they're not a North Atlantic country, but you'll probably find that none of the Scandinavian countries are either, and also none of the European countries are. The only North Atlantic countries that you'll find that exist are, of course, the ones in the western seas of Europe, the British Isles, and the east coast of the United States. Also, so it becomes a bit of a non-sequitur. Like they're sort of they're not really balancing that out. So the biggest strategy amongst all these rotations between the different camps and the different countries and the different militaries makes for a massive headfuck, particularly when they engage in enormous amounts of pretenses. It makes it very difficult to be able to tell who is doing what exactly and why. And then, they say, oh, no, now there's Chinese warships going around Australia. It's like, oh, but they're just doing exercises or whatever. Oh, okay. There was something that tried to say that that China was going to invade Australia and kill everyone. But what that actually what that actually turned out to be was NATO pretending it was China to try and prevent the US from pulling out of NATO. Okay, so when you get into stuff like that, they're too dishonest. They're too dishonest. It doesn't matter which one they are. They're too dishonest. It doesn't matter if the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, NATO, whatever. They are too dishonest. Okay, and of course none of them have jurisdiction in Australia, so there's that too. What happens after that is anyone's guess, except for World War III. That's what they want you to think. So, but in the backstory of the lower timeline, the fear timeline, we are manifesting World War III. But actually, in the greater story, what we're really doing is we've already dealt with Project Bluebeam's 48-dimensional chessboard situation, in which case every single team got a stalemate. So there's absolutely no possibility of any of the countries starting a war with any other country without each country getting into trouble. It is not in any country's best interest to start a war at the moment. So they're all a bit confused. Okay, and they're shuffling the decks. So at the highest timeline, what the highest timeline that's going to come to pass in about November this year, the talks are going to start for that, is there's going to be a international series of non-aggression pacts by every single country. Every single country is going to do a non-aggression pact. Okay? And every military base that exists on the soil of a country will be controlled by that country exclusively. So the idea of a foreign military base just won't happen anymore. And it won't matter which country does it. Okay? Local military will control whichever military base is on their surface. Okay? It'll be as simple as that. So there'll be international non-aggression pacts. And the purpose of all this stuff coming to the surface and all these games being played and stuff like that is to undo the what the New Age movement calls the Armageddon software. Okay. Unfortunately, the blue grid was the blue grid, which sort of acts as a subnet adjacent to the military subgrids, and sometimes cleans out some of its consequences, had some cult programming on it, specifically associated with the New Age movement, which means it was suffering from cultural myopia. And there were international groups that were insulted. They were insulted because the New Age movement, if you look at the actual maths of what that goes back to Blavatsky, saying that the only humans were the Nordics, and everyone else was potentially from a hostile alien race. It was like, well, some countries, including beings that alleged that they were Chinese, took that to mean that they had been dehumanized and treated as a hostile alien force by NATO. And that is not a common thought amongst the Chinese military, but it is a thought that some of them have had. And so there is an international movement against the New Age movement. And of course, Pope Francis is leading the charge. So with Project 2025, they're trying to do this return to Catholicism thing in the USA, basically, and sort of like a fascistic version of Catholicism at that. But they don't have to do that. They don't have to keep doing their Masonic geomantic shit, and they don't have to do Catholicism either. They are a multicultural society, and there are plenty of options available, and the same is true of every country. So with China, they suffer from massive amounts of cultural myopia as well due to their sort of like insular, closed-off history, or allegedly insular and closed-off. It depends on your point of view. You don't really get to follow a lot of Chinese history if all you use is English-speaking and they speak Chinese, basically. Same with any other country. And so basically what's happening is that the rich northern hemisphere is afraid of losing its control of the south. Okay, so it's the northern hemisphere countries that are rich have been gaining their wealth based on ripping off the southern countries. So Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, and Australia, Oceania, all these countries have been ripped off for centuries by rich northern hemisphere countries like the United States, NATO countries, Russia, China, etc., etc. And they're absolutely sick to death of it. And so what happened is the Christians were praying for the end of days for several thousand years. They couldn't wait for the second coming of the Messiah and the end of the world because Christianity is a death cult. And, of course, the Masonic groups or the Theosophists or whatever, which the New Age movement sprang from, are more than happy to assist in bringing that about because they want a world with a lower population of only them in it, where they are in possession of everyone else's souls, and they are just sit there and just manifest whatever they want and don't have to work. So they live in a sort of fantastical la-la land that could only be described as what you might call a sort of middle-class psychosis. And you can't say that's true of everyone who does what you call the New Age stuff, but as a movement, you can sort of see that. So there's a tension there between the hard work people and the manipulative game playing people. What a lot of people have noticed is that the New Age movement is false love and false light. In a similar way that the major world religions are false love and false light, and so it's basically it goes back to sort of like the game playing thing and stuff like that. So what they've decided to do, what the collective mass of the world has decided to do, is to sort of play out the Armageddon software. So do you really want this? Okay, the main message for everyone, including every single group, religious group and language group, is: do you really want this? Is this what you really want? Okay, everyone's been asked to consider: is this what you really want? Do you want to keep saying that the psychopaths rule the world? If you believe that words are spells and therefore spell casting, then why would you say the psychopaths rule the world? Why would you say the devil is the god of this world? Why would you say that power and authority and influence is for people with money, people that you don't like? Why are you talking like that for? Are you under a spell when you do that? Why do you want the Messiah to come back? Why do you want the end of the world for? Do you really want this? Do you want to believe that the world's a simulation because in the 1990s somebody smoked some marijuana while watching The Matrix? Or do you want the tech bros to put that simulation on you? Or do you want something else? Do you really want this? So the main message of the collective mind is: do you really want this? Do you want a world of misandry and misogyny and racism? Do you really want this? Do you want a world that's governed by a false map, a Baudrillardian map, a spectacle called the Tree of Life and Tree of Death? Do you really want this? Do you want their chakra bats? Do you really want this? Do you want to be controlled by aliens from outer space? Do you really want this? Do you want to be controlled by artificial intelligence beings that are posing as aliens from outer space? Do you really want this? Do you want to believe that all aliens are against you and are the shaitan? Do you really want this? Do you want to believe that they are friends? Do you really want this? Okay, do you want to see that the only people in the world are fucking humans and Nordics? Do you really want this? Do you want to continue with the noble lesser bleach, fucking white man's burning crap? Do you really want this? Do you want to have a situation where the racism of Asians and blacks and other groups are overlooked because of the overarching racism of that is imperial cults? Do you really want this? Do you want structural inequality? Do you want all the toxicity? Do you really want this? Do you want a sickness creating world or curse creating world? Do you really want this? Do you want to be slaves to a military that treats you like a fucking robot or would treat other people like robot slaves? Do you really want this? Do you want to be a goddamn fucking program in a fucking machine when you know full well reality is not a machine and you are not a fucking robot? Every time you go to the toilet, you know you're not a fucking robot. You know shit be real then. Do you really want this? Do you really want this? So the Armageddon software has been played out in such a matter of, do you really want this? Do you really want this? Okay, you want to put pressure, you want to fucking be imposter spirits inside women, and you want to have your women can't be God thing, or you have to lose your identity because of the crap mess you've done with misreading the fucking Bible. When it's a country where the Bible has no jurisdiction and neither is Masonry or anything else. Do you really want this? Do you want to assume that because where you came from you believe certain things that where you went to believe that as well? Do you really want this? Do you want your cultural myopia? Do you want your sexism? Do you want your racism? Do you want your bigotry? Do you want your defeatist amoralism? Do you really want this? Do you really want a bunch of middle-aged women in the USA walking around pretending they're fucking starseeds because some old dickhead stole their fucking identity and an AI being got stuffed in their head and called itself an alien for fucking outer space, and then they pretended that they were, you know, fucking psychic because they were doing synthetic telepathy with some artificial blue grit that got invented in the 1970s as a backdrop to support the fucking military? Do you really want this? The people of the world need to think about what they really want. Do you want pleb-on-pleb violence? Do you really want this? What do you really want?